Hi everyone. I'm not really doing a review video right now. I'm kind of doing a response to this new article in Paste Magazine by Jim Vorel. It's called like how an IPA lover fell out of love with, or how a craft beer geek fell out of love with hazy IPA. Um, and it's these kind of articles and discussions in the beer world that really annoy me because it seems like most of the time any discussion in the beer world, like at any time, it's just complaining about trends. And for some reason, these beer writers always like are extremely subjective in their thoughts and not realizing it. And they're saying it as if it's just objective truth, and they're acting like people haven't been making these same basic complaints forever. Like 10 years ago, the same complaints. They think that so many beer writers and lovers think that they know what beer is, what is true, traditional, what beer should be. No one knows what beer should be. No one should think that. Beer has been a million things forever. But let's get on to it. So, the beginning of this article first, has a little bit of an introduction about all the IPAs they drink for Paste Magazine and blah, blah, blah. It eventually says that with, hazy IPAs he loved, he found them refreshing and charming a few years ago, quote, but now increasingly they seem rote and uninspired as it became clear that many were chasing after a very similar, narrowly defined ideal. Worse still, they began to notice at Pace Magazine that many breweries were taking the concept too far, overloading their hazy IPAs with unpalatable levels of hop flavor, which ultimately tended up to have the opposite effect. IPAs created with maximum juice in mind were tasting like sludgy plant matter, blah, 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 but beer drinkers were still raving about how great they were, seemingly unable to tell the difference. That's immediately super condescending. It's assuming that all these people have bad taste. They don't actually just really like things, and you're assuming that they can't tell two apart. He's kind of saying that most of these hazy IPAs are all bad, and there's no difference between them. And with my video reviews, I've been really trying to figure out what the difference is in between them, why I like one more, what brewing process they did that made it better or worse, and this is really hard stuff with the hazy IPAs because there's been no research on this stuff up until starting a few years ago, so we don't even know the science about it quite yet. If you want to try to tease through Scott Janish's The New IPA, that's a great book for it, but it's just so much info from scientific studies, it's kind of hard to figure it out. So that's my first problem with the article. And then he just goes on to say there's just so much bad hazy IPA out there now that it feels more like statistically likely you'll get a bad one than a good one at this point. I'm a super picky dude. Actually, I have a very hard to get brewery right now, From the Barrel in Derry, New Hampshire. You have to go to the brewery. They're super duper tiny. And I've had some beers from them that had some sludge on the bottom, but it was still an extremely good beer, and all I have to do is not pour out the sludge. It's like no one complains about chunks and sediment in a 3-year-old sour beer that's bottle conditioned. Get used to decanting these properly, like come on. So this is strictly Citra Pale Ale from Barrel. I've not had this one yet. I thought while I do this, I don't know, response / lecture or whatever, I should try some beer. It smells really good. I think it's just pure Citra. It's strictly Citra, 5.5% alcohol, canned like less than a week ago. Big, juicy fruit notes from the Citra. And that doesn't smell too green, doesn't smell scary. It's nice, very low in bitterness, but it has a little bit of a tartness, a teeny hint of astringency that kind of fills in for the bitterness, and it works out pretty well. And the thing is that even before there was hazy IPA everywhere, there were so many bad, clear, regular IPAs being made. So many bad things. Like that's why I stopped drinking IPAs, 8 years ago, and then I came back to it because breweries trying to do this sort of thing. I was like, well, this is totally different. I was so tired of having really malty, really bitter IPAs. That this is kind of the opposite. And that's kind of what happened is we had this explosion of people making bigger and bigger, more bitter IPAs, and I was kind of into it. And then for some reason my palate hit a wall. Maybe that's what happened with Jim Varell's palate with this style. I'm not as crazy about these beers as I used to be, but I still can't help drinking them. Yeah, he says it's harder to be enthusiastic about sampling new ones if they're also bad. Or if most of them are bad, but I think that's just how it is with IPAs. Everyone's tastes are changing on what a good IPA is at all times, and these beers, they don't even a filtered, pasteurized, filtered bottled one that's been in a fridge. After 6 months, it's not going to be very good at all. I mean, some breweries have figured it out. Some breweries are really good at packaging with no dissolved oxygen and all that crap, but it's still really, really hard to find any IPA that is really good and suits your tastes. Yeah, and he complains about the omnipresence of IPAs everywhere. Reached the point where it's completely inundated with sweet, juicy hop profiles. It's kind of weird. He goes back and forth being like, oh, they overload it with hops, so it's vegetal and astringent, but then at the same time, it's too sweet. I find that I don't have both of those happening at the same time in these beers usually. But he just says, yes, I'm officially burned out. And then he goes on to do a list of 3 specific factors that led to his disillusionment with Hazy IPA. The saturation of samey limited releases. So this is kind of a newer trend of making, a brand new beer every week. Some breweries do that. Finback makes 1 million new IPAs all the time. A lot of breweries do it, and yes, it is bad because there's no consistency. You don't know, but people want to try these new things. There are new brewing methods and new hops coming out all the time. And also, you can go back way before Hazy IPA and blame the millions of new releases on the so-called gypsy or contract beer companies that aren't even breweries. Go back to I guess Omni Pollo isn't that old, but Mikkeller and Evil Twin and Stillwater, a lot of their stuff, they kind of did the whole social media, make a cool label, make a new beer all the time, have a bunch of different breweries making them, so you really don't know the consistency because there are a bunch of different companies, and if you aren't savvy enough to know on the can, look at where the city it's brewed in, and know what breweries are in that city, you don't know. So it's this kind of problem with consistency and just newness is beyond even Hazy IPAs. I kind of blaming it on that. Yeah, and there's an overvaluation of new that, the newest beers, the hip hypists get the highest ratings, but that's just kind of how it is. That's going to be that way, even if hazy beer stops existing, or if it never existed, that's how it would just be. So that makes you not like the taste of this beer because people do new ones. I don't really know. Yeah, but there's all these new hop varieties, so people need to try them out. We need to bring brand new beers out all the time, and you need to do research to figure out how to brew this beer better, make it so it's not sludgy and astringent. Maybe in 5 years, most breweries will be able to make a really good one, but it's hard. No one knows exactly what the key is to do, and it's so different in every brewery. And he says, yeah, now the consumer's realizing, or hopefully realizing, how similar many of these beers are, but think about IPA 10 years ago. 10 years ago, all the breweries used the exact same yeasts for all of their beers, not just their IPAs. That was one really boring thing. You go to a brewery and all the beers are brewed with Chico or American Ale yeast. And then you go to another brewery and they're making all the same styles with the exact same yeast. Ugh, come on. And also, 10 years ago, all the breweries, their beers the IPAs had a little bit of caramel malt, citrusy, malt backbone, firm bitterness. It was all kind of the same too, It's always this is just what breweries have to do. They have to appeal to what customers seem to want, and how can you complain about that? All right, let me move on. Yeah, and he's saying that they're using these new varieties of hops in ridiculous quantities so that all you taste is green and vegetal notes. because some IPA ends up being like that, does that mean it's a whole bad trend and that you shouldn't be drinking these? You can't find any IPA that you like? I don't know. It's just like a weak argument, a lot of this stuff to me. And then he goes on to do the same complaint that people have been doing for 15, maybe even 20 years. He goes to a brewery, they had 11 IPAs and double IPAs on their menu. People have been complaining about breweries making too many IPAs for so long. It's been the most popular style for a decade now. Great. Like this article is kind of unnecessary. Like all these complaining about trends articles, they seem like they're not very self-aware, and there's no reason for this article to exist. Like so many beer writers and people on social media and Twitter, they just like to complain about things. It's kind of off the cuff, and that's just what people like to do. They like to complain about things, read about it, and it's kind of fun, and it seems like it's timely. But it gets us kind of nowhere, you know? There are much more constructive ways of doing this. Like, be like, oh, this is what I really like about these certain IPAs. I wish more brewers would do this, or talk about what you think makes those beers really good, and inspire other people to try them and do that, rather than just being like, I give up on a whole style, I don't like this trend, blah blah blah. Yeah, and he says, let's see, who wants to taste through a lineup where almost every beer uses the same descriptive language? Yeah, a lot of these brewers, they're saying tropical fruits and all that sort of stuff. But yes, as I said before, 10 years ago, all IPAs were described as like, quote, citrusy aroma, firm bitterness, light caramel malt backbone. All right, now they're not like that. People always say tropical and juicy, but those are just the descriptors and the flavors of the day. It goes on to complaining about maximum bombast. It's like so stupid. Like, because you describe your beers with ridiculous language, always saying the juiciest thing in the world, that makes you not want to drink someone's beer. It's just their copy, you know. It's just how they're trying to advertise it. It says nothing about whether the beer is actually good or not. Like, this is a really stupid thing. I mean, it's mainly you're complaining about marketing. You're not complaining about this beer, okay? You're complaining about the marketing and the advertisement and the artwork and who's writing that stuff. And let's see. He says that in these beers now, tooth stripping sweetness is the norm. Whether it's, whatever style, pastry stout, the sweet lactose sours of the day, or hazy IPA. And then this is a really confusing thing he says. There are the hallmarks of an era that has long since waved goodbye to any sense of proportion or dignity. What? There's an era of proportion and dignity in beer that he thinks there's some ideal time when beer was perfect, and that it's not always evolving, and there aren't always new styles and rediscovering of old styles. Like, what? It's like saying make beer great again. It's really gross. Like, what is it? Was it 10 years ago that when we would have cartoons and sexy ladies on beer bottles, they would have 5 paragraphs talking about how you can't handle how this beer is so bitter? Like, there's been bombast and ridiculous writing on beer for ever since, I guess it was probably the West Coast IPA thing started. And yeah, he says that the highest rated beers now, they don't have that proportion and dignity. They have an uncomfortable tendency to sound like something that a child would have designed. And it's like, there's been crazy shit thrown in beer forever. Look up the style chicha. Look at, like, people for thousands and thousands of years all over the world just throw whatever they have into their beer, or something that's beer-like, or a beer, mead, or cider or wine hybrid. You can put whatever you want in beer, and you can't complain about it. Like, people can do that. Who cares? Just don't drink it if you don't want it. There is plenty of good beer to be found, Let's see. And then number 3, he hates the sheer difficulty of drinking modern hazy IPA. He says that modern hazy IPA is increasingly defined by being hard to drink, especially in quantity. I don't find that. This is probably the most subjective thing possible. I encourage you to find my video review of Stone IPA, or I couldn't drink that. Is he saying that these are bad and these are undrinkable, but Stone IPA is like, I couldn't drink half of that. Way too bitter with way too much toasty malt. But that's, I guess that the let's see. Is that the sense of proportion and dignity and insanely bitter Stone IPA? This is just kind of garbage. This is just like total garbage. Let's see. Let me try to get through this. I guess I've kind of gone through it. So I'm just complaining about someone else who's complaining for the most part here. But I'm gonna keep drinking this, and it's gonna be popular. And I'm never gonna write an article complaining about beer trends. It's just a waste of time. There's so much more we could talk about. It's way more interesting. And yeah, there's always this, when people talk about this, there's always this idea that they know what beer should be, or that there's this like German beer, those styles, that's the be all end all, even though Pilsner's only existed for 175 years. I guess a little more, maybe not, but like newness or oldness, like it doesn't, it's all messed up. And sometimes it even seems a little bit like colonialist to me or something, like, or thinking that, oh, the traditional European beer styles and ways of brewing, those are good, assuming that for some reason everything goes back to traditional European values and culture, is like, that's the be all end all. No, come on. Let people throw a bunch of fruit in a beer. Just because those fruits didn't exist in Europe in 1724 doesn't mean they're not allowed to be in beer. I guess that's my little vaguely social justice message about beer. It's hard to, you can't get too deep in it with beer. It's still just beer. But this one is very good. Maybe I'll talk about it for a second. A real drinkable and spillable. But this does not have the astringency. It is very low. It's actually called a pale ale, 5.5%. And it has, a very moderate amount of bitterness, like a pale ale should. And it is quite hazy. And I know this brewery sometimes has a little sludge on the bottom, so I'm not pouring it in. And has a nice glow to it. It isn't the brightest, most sunny looking IPA, but there's no oxidation. It just gets that straight, intense Citra flavor and aroma across that I really, really love. And I could chug this whole thing right now. And even though I love Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, I don't know if I could chug that one. That one's actually, I think, sweeter and more bitter. And it's bottle conditioned, so it might have a little more carbonation. I don't know. But I guess this is a good time to end this. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about this. But just reading that article, I feel like I had to respond. All right, hope this wasn't boring. Bye.